April 18, 1945. Philippine Sea, 240 miles east of Okinawa. The morning sun glinted off restless waves, turning the horizon into a sheet of liquid gold and steel. Through the low clouds, a solitary Zero fighter tore the sky, one wing trembling under the strain, smoke trailing from its engine like a wounded bird. Inside, Inen Tadayoshi Koga, barely 20, tasted blood and salt on his lips. His fingers clenched the controls as the engine coughed, then shuddered, threatening to quit entirely. 3 hours earlier, he had taken off from Formosa on what was meant to be a routine patrol. Now, the Pacific stretched empty beneath him, the familiar outline of land nowhere in sight. Hellcats had struck from the sun. His wingman was gone, vanishing in a blossom of fire. Koga had dove through clouds, evaded enemy rounds, and now faced a final choice: plunge into the sea or risk an impossible gamble. USS Bogue, a Casablanca-class escort carrier, deck crowded with American planes. The Zero's landing gear dropped slowly. Silence fell over the cockpit. The moment of fate had arrived. By April 1945, the Pacific War had entered its final, brutal phase. The United States had moved inexorably across the island chains, leapfrogging from one strategic position to the next. Okinawa, the last major stepping stone before the Japanese home islands, had become a focal point of resistance. From Formosa, the Japanese military launched patrols to contest the skies, desperate to slow the American advance. Every sortie carried high risk. Airfields were overstretched, fuel scarce, and seasoned pilots increasingly rare. The USS Bogue, a Casablanca-class escort carrier, patrolled the Philippine Sea alongside a screen of destroyers and support vessels. Unlike fleet carriers bristling with dozens of aircraft, Bogue operated with a smaller complement of fighters and bombers, specializing in anti-submarine patrols and escorting convoys. Its air group, including Grumman Wildcats and Avengers, was trained to intercept enemy aircraft before they could reach American ships or supply lines. Every day, lookouts scanned the horizon for threats, while gunners practiced the steady rotation of their anti-aircraft barrels, anticipating the unpredictable maneuvers of Japanese fighters. For pilots like Koga, the skies were a battlefield of extremes. The Mitsubishi A6M0 had once dominated the Pacific early in the war, but by 1945 it faced newer, faster American fighters. Japanese doctrine emphasized agility, surprise, and kamikaze attacks as conventional victories became scarce. Patrols were brief, dangerous, and often deadly. 3 hours before the encounter with Bogue, Koga had taken off under the weight of this grim reality. A young man carrying the hopes of a nation in an aircraft designed for maneuver, not survival. At that moment, the Pacific stretched endlessly below him, and the next few minutes would force him to confront choices no training had prepared him for. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was a marvel of lightweight engineering. Its frame sacrificed armor and self-sealing fuel tanks for unmatched agility and climb rate. Early in the war, American pilots had struggled to counter its tight turns and long range, earning it a fearsome reputation. By 1945, however, the balance of air power had shifted. S-fighters like the F-6F Hellcat outpaced and outgunned the Zero, and naval intelligence had accumulated extensive knowledge of its strengths and vulnerabilities. Every Japanese pilot flying over the Pacific now faced both skillful enemies and the relentless pressure of dwindling resources. Fuel shortages and overstretched airfields compounded the danger. Koga's patrol had begun with routine orders, but by the time the Hellcat struck from the sun, the Pacific felt infinite and isolating. One wrong turn could lead to the ocean below or an unplanned encounter with an enemy carrier group. The Japanese command structure increasingly relied on kamikaze attacks, turning desperation into doctrine, while ordinary fighter pilots were left to navigate the thinning line between survival and annihilation.
Across the water, the USS Bogue and her crew had seen this pattern repeatedly. Every alert brought the tension of life-or-death decision-making. Lookouts scanned the skies for the first signs of enemy aircraft, while gunners followed standardized procedures to minimize mistakes. Carrier crews were trained to react in seconds, launch, recover, intercept, but nothing could fully prepare them for the unprecedented: a Japanese fighter attempting to land on an American deck. As Koga's fuel dwindled and his engine faltered, the vastness of the sea offered no refuge. And yet, in the distance, a steel deck appeared, rising from the waves, a lifeline and a threat in the same instant. Fate was converging on him, and the impossible choice that would define this morning was only seconds away.
Inen Tadayoshi Koga was just 20 years old, barely more than a boy in the eyes of the world, yet burdened with the weight of duty and the indoctrinated ideals of honor. He had been trained to resist to the last breath, to embrace death over capture. Now, alone in a crippled Zero, smoke trailing from the engine, he faced a raw human decision: continue fighting against impossible odds or surrender to survival. His heart raced with fear, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The Pacific stretched endlessly below him, indifferent to his struggle. In that moment, Koga's humanity eclipsed ideology. He wanted only to live. Tactical angle. From the deck of the USS Bogue, every sailor and officer was attuned to the rhythm of potential attack. Anti-aircraft guns were trained skyward, lookouts scanning for the glint of enemy wings. A single misjudgment could mean death for the pilot or devastation for the ship. The Zero's approach violated every expectation. It was slow, unarmed, and descending with landing gear extended, signals that confounded standard combat assumptions. Tactical training collided with the unpredictable. In those tense seconds, split-second decisions would determine the outcome. Technological angle. The Zero itself was both marvel and liability. Lightweight, maneuverable, designed for dogfights, yet fragile and poorly armored. By contrast, the Hellcats that hunted it were faster, sturdier, and supported by American radar and intelligence. The carrier deck below was a technological ecosystem: arresting wires, landing signal officers, and tightly coordinated crews, all designed for precision recovery of friendly aircraft. The convergence of fragile Japanese engineering with disciplined American deck operations created the conditions for an unprecedented encounter. These angles, the human instinct to survive, the tactical uncertainty on deck, and the technological disparities in play, formed the stage for one of the most extraordinary moments of the Pacific War. Leadership angle. Commander Harold Dixon, Air Operations Chief aboard the USS Bogue, faced a scenario no manual could cover. An enemy aircraft, damaged, unarmed, approaching the flight deck. Was it kamikaze or a desperate pilot? Every instinct demanded caution. Dixon's decision to hold fire required calm under impossible pressure, an understanding of both risk and human behavior. Technological angle. The Zero itself was both marvel and liability. Lightweight, maneuverable, designed for dogfights, yet fragile and poorly armored. By contrast, the Hellcats that hunted it were faster, sturdier, and supported by American radar and intelligence. The carrier deck below was a technological ecosystem: arresting wires, landing signal officers, and tightly coordinated crews, all designed for precision recovery of friendly aircraft. The convergence of fragile Japanese engineering with disciplined American deck operations created the conditions for an unprecedented encounter. Leadership angle. Commander Harold Dixon, Air Operations Chief aboard the USS Bogue, faced a scenario no manual could cover. An enemy aircraft, damaged, unarmed, approaching the flight deck. Was it kamikaze or a desperate pilot? Every instinct demanded caution. Dixon's decision to hold fire required calm under impossible pressure, an understanding of both risk and human behavior. One order saved a life that day, illustrating how leadership in war is measured not only by aggression, but by judgment and restraint. Enemy moral angle. The surreal sight of Koga Zero descending slowly, wheels down, forced the crew to confront a profound moral choice. This was a trained enemy, once a symbol of destruction in the Pacific, now exposed and vulnerable. Sailors raised rifles, prepared for conflict, yet refrained from shooting. For a brief heartbeat, the identities of friend and foe blurred. Humanity, not ideology, guided the moment. A captured pilot would become a living testament to the possibility of restraint, even amid total war. Strategic angle. The Zero was more than a plane. It was intelligence in flight. Navy a window into Japanese engineering, tactics, and weaknesses. Every panel, every control cable, every inch of fuselage provided data that could save lives in future encounters. The strategic significance of one pilot's miscalculation rippled far beyond the carrier deck. In that single event, a youth's desperate bid for survival intersected with military foresight, shaping the Pacific Campaign in ways no bullet could. The convergence of human courage, moral choice, and strategic advantage transformed a simple landing into a historic turning point. Each angle, personal, operational, and technological, intertwined, setting the stage for the moment when the Zero touched down, silent yet impossible, and history paused to take note. The Zero wavered in the morning sky, smoke trailing from its cowling, engines sputtering with each heartbeat. Below, the USS Bogue's deck was alive with tension. Sailors froze, eyes scanning the approaching silhouette. Guns swiveled, barrels seeking the enemy, but the figure in the cockpit offered no familiar threat. Koga's hands were white on the controls. Every gust of wind threatened to pitch the fragile fighter into the sea. The deck rose closer with every second, a narrow rectangle of life and death. He held the stick steady, throttle trembling, the engine groaning as though it too feared the landing. Above, clouds scudded across the sky, shadows flickering over the steel expanse below. On deck, the landing signal officer froze, paddles in hand. Could a Japanese Zero be trying to land? Commanders shouted, but Dixon's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold fire." The words echoed over the roar of the wind and engines, halting instinctive reactions. 50 feet, 40, 30. The Zero trembled, nose dipping, landing gear straining. Crewmen braced, hearts thundering, knowing that any miscalculation could end in a fiery wreck. The arresting wires glinted in the sunlight, the final lifeline between survival and disaster. 20 feet. Smoke bellowed from the engine, exhaust scraping along the fuselage. 10 feet. Koga exhaled, easing back on the throttle as if coaxing the machine to obey. The deck rushed upward. Metal screeched, wood cracked. The Zero slammed down, bouncing once, skidding sideways across the wires before the tailhook caught the fourth, jerking it violently to a stop. Silence fell instantly, as though the Pacific itself held its breath. Enen Tadayoshi Koga, trembling in the cockpit, dared to lift his gaze. Around him, sailors stared back, disbelief written across every face. A Japanese pilot had landed, alive, on an American aircraft carrier. For the crew, the impossible had just happened. For Koga, survival hung in the balance. The deck erupted into cautious motion. Sailors approached the Zero with rifles raised, yet fingers remained off triggers. Commander Dixon strode forward, assessing the situation with calm precision. The young pilot's hands rose slowly, trembling, and for the first time, both sides recognized the fragile thread separating life from death. Koga's cockpit canopy creaked as he pushed it open. Oil streaked across his cheek, a cut above his eyebrow bleeding into his hairline. The wind off the Philippine Sea whipped across his face, carrying the tang of salt and smoke. For a fleeting moment, he was not an enemy, not a symbol of war, but simply a human being, exhausted and alive. Two sailors guided him from the cockpit. His legs buckled, and they caught him instinctively. Around them, the crew studied the Zero, marveling at its light frame, exposed fuel lines, and delicate construction.
This death trap with wings, as one mechanic muttered, now represented an extraordinary prize. Intelligence officers descended, cameras clicked, and engineers inspected every bolt, every cable. Below deck, Koga was escorted to a small compartment, guarded, yet treated with careful professionalism. A medic cleaned his wound, offered water, and left without a word of reprimand. For the first time, the reality of his survival sank in. The Americans were not the monsters his training had insisted they were. Meanwhile, on the flight deck, the captured Zero became the focal point of attention.
Chief Engineer Addison marveled at the engine mounts, the minimal weight, and the remarkable agility this lightweight frame allowed pilots to exploit vulnerabilities and refine tactics for future engagements. In one extraordinary sequence of minutes, a desperate Japanese pilot, a vigilant American carrier crew, and the fragile engineering of a warplane converged to create a moment that would echo through the Pacific campaign. Koga's survival, accidental yet precise, transformed an isolated encounter into a significant intelligence coup. The human drama and the strategic implications were inseparable, both would shape what came next. Below deck, Inen Tadayoshi Koga sat on a metal bench, hands clasped tightly, still trembling from the adrenaline of his impossible landing. 2 MPs stood outside, silent sentinels. The fear that had been drilled into him, of capture, of brutality, of dishonor, clashed with the reality before him. A medic entered, calm and efficient, cleaning the cut above his brow and offering him a small cup of water. Hesitant, Koga drank. Cold, clean, life-giving. It was the first tangible sign that survival did not necessitate humiliation or pain. In those moments, Koga began to reconcile the contradiction he had lived with since childhood. Japanese military doctrine had instilled a rigid notion: surrender was shameful, Americans were monsters. Yet here, on a floating city of steel, he encountered professionalism, care, and restraint. Each action, from the medic's gentle touch to the officer's calm inquiries, taught him a new unspoken lesson about the humanity that persisted even amidst war. Above him, on the flight deck, the Zero rested under the scrutiny of engineers and intelligence officers. Photographs were taken, measurements logged, and panels removed to study the delicate construction. Every rivet, every cable, every thin sheet of metal offered insight into Japanese design philosophy. What had been a vehicle of destruction became a trove of knowledge. Each examination echoed the subtle irony of war. An enemy aircraft, captured without a shot, could save countless American lives through the information it revealed. The morning's impossible encounter had ended, but its consequences were only beginning to ripple through the ship, the crew, and the broader Pacific campaign. Koga's fate, once uncertain, settled into the rhythms of captivity. He was moved to more comfortable quarters, a small room with a real bed, a desk, and a narrow window letting in the Philippine sunlight. Meals arrived promptly: rice, chicken, bread, water, ordinary sustenance, yet to Koga it felt extraordinary. Each bite reminded him that he was alive, protected, and treated with a dignity he had not expected. Above, the captured Zero became the center of intense technical scrutiny. Engineers meticulously dismantled the aircraft, documenting every component. Chief Engineer Addison marveled at the lightweight frame, the minimal armor, and the exposed fuel lines that had once made it lethal in skilled hands. Each discovery informed American pilots, allowing them to simulate dogfights, anticipate maneuvers, and exploit vulnerabilities. The lessons gleaned from this single fighter would save lives and reshape tactical doctrine in the Pacific. Koga, meanwhile, wrestled with a mixture of relief and shame. His mission had failed. His aircraft, the pride of Japan, was now in enemy hands, and his return home was uncertain. Yet survival itself had become a quiet act of defiance, a personal victory against the relentless pressures of war. On deck, the USS Bogue's crew understood the magnitude of the capture. The aircraft was more than a machine. It was a turning point. One pilot's miscalculation, one act of survival, had shifted the balance of knowledge, giving the United States a rare and priceless glimpse into the enemy's craft. The extraordinary human story intertwined seamlessly with strategic advantage, leaving a legacy that would outlast the morning's drama. In war, fate often turns on the smallest decisions. A young pilot, lost and exhausted, chose survival over ideology, and in doing so altered the course of events far beyond his understanding. Inen Tadayoshi Koga's accidental landing on the USS Bogue was more than an extraordinary human story. It was a convergence of courage, chance, and consequence. For the crew, the encounter was a lesson in restraint and judgment. Commander Dixon's calm decision to hold fire, the medic's careful attention, and the sailor's disciplined patience revealed that even amid total war, humanity could persist. One fleeting moment of hesitation saved a life, and that life would, in turn, provide the Americans with insights that influenced countless battles to come. The Zero itself, stripped apart and studied, became a symbol of both ingenuity and vulnerability. It illustrated how technology, like human skill, could tip the scales in warfare. Every wire, panel, and control surface analyzed by American engineers informed strategy, preserved lives, and transformed knowledge into power. For Koga, survival carried a complex weight: shame for failure, awe at his captor's humanity, and the quiet understanding that he had become part of history in a way he could never have imagined. In the vast Pacific, on a steel deck rising from the waves, two enemies met not in fire, but in circumstance. One fragile decision, one act of preservation, and the world witnessed that even in war, chance and humanity could intersect and change history forever.